Has this been done before? Yes. Do I give a fuck? No. Hi baddies. Splatoon is a franchise that's only been around for 10 years, but in my opinion has enough lore to rival that of The Legend of Zelda. And yes, there are many videos about the lore, but I thought it'd be fun to explain it like it's a fun little story time. That being said, some disclaimers. I'm purely going to be focusing on the story and the characters. I'm going to refrain from mentioning anything gameplay related. The splat bans are not going to be mentioned as well, only because I feel like that could be its own separate video. Everything is going to be in chronological order rather than game order. So for example, if any information that's mentioned in Splatoon 3 is dated before the events of Splatoon 1, I'm going to be mentioning that first. However, when it comes to like big reveals and stuff, I will be saving that for when they are revealed in the game that they came in. I did take very few creative liberties just to connect some dots and make the overall story flow a bit better, but if you just want the cut and dry information, then this video might not be for you. I will also be explaining it in a way that's introductory, meaning if you're completely new to the franchise or don't feel like playing the game and just want to know the story, I'm going to be introducing terms, characters, and places like you have no idea what they are. A few terms to keep in mind are sunken scrolls, Alterna logs, chat room sessions, and dev diaries, which I will be mentioning as sources multiple times throughout this video. All of these are collectibles that are found within the game itself that help expand the story. Sunken scrolls are collectibles found in the 3 game story campaigns that contain information about Splatoon's world and history. Alterna logs are collectibles that are unique to Splatoon 3 story campaign that contain more information about the history than the present. Chat room sessions are in Splatoon 2's Octo Expansion DLC, and they focus on the history and interactions of the characters that are involved. And the dev diaries detail the story leading up to Splatoon 3's Side Order DLC. All of the sources I am using will pop up in one of the bottom corners somewhere when they are relevant. And finally, I'm not going to hide the fact that I am reading from a screen because I wrote way too much, but without further ado, let's talk about the underrated lore of Splatoon. Our story doesn't begin during Splatoon 1, because why would you think that? It actually begins 12,000 years before the events of Splatoon 1 with humanity as we know it, and as humanity does, they can't stop fucking fighting each other. They are now caught up in their 5th World War, which is seemingly being fought over land due to rising sea levels because I guess they just never figured out how to stop global warming. This is where we meet the scientist professor and his cat, Judd. Judd is a cat that has this freak ability to determine what the winning side of the war seems to be, and the professor sees this as an opportunity to make some money. He takes Judd to a military general and places him in front of a territory map. Judd can't seem to figure out which side is winning, determining that both sides are currently equal in terms of land occupation. The professor then gives the general a nuclear missile because why not, saying that will ensure it tips the scale in his side's favor, and he walks away with more money than I'll ever see in my life. Not long after, however, the professor starts to regret making the weapon, knowing what it could possibly do. Fearing what little time he might have left, he uses the money he got to develop and build an AI software that holds all of his scientific knowledge, hoping it can be of help to future civilizations as well as warn them of the mistakes humanity made so that they won't repeat them. He also decides to inject Judd with an experimental immortality drug, then cryogenically freezes himself and Judd for 10,000 years, specifically knowing that Judd's ability could be of help to those in the future as well. The scientist also urges Judd to quote-unquote re-energize the capsule once he does wake up, seemingly equipping the pod with the cloning ability so that if Judd doesn't wake up, he will be cloned, and if both Judd and the clone survive, Judd might feel less alone and have someone else with him. Spoiler alert, the general ends up using the missile and launching it into the South Pole, which melts the remaining ice caps and plunges what's left of the land underwater, killing almost everyone. Many people in the cryogenic pods also do not end up surviving, including who seems to be the professor as evidenced by this panel in the Splatoon 1 art book. Others decided to put their trust in a rocket called the Arc Polaris that would launch just before the world's ultimate demise in search of a habitable planet elsewhere. Inside were more cryogenic pods that held not only humans but many animals as well. Things seemed to be going well until debris hit the rocket, forcing the crew to turn around. Unfortunately, they did not have enough fuel to go back, and the rocket ended up drifting in space for some 10,000 years. Eventually, it drifted close enough to Earth that it was pulled back into its orbit, but even more unfortunately, the re-entry was terrible and killed any remaining life form inside, except for one. We'll get back to that later. The only living things that seemed to survive at the time of Earth's initial demise built makeshift domes underground. The domes did not last long, however, as the structures fell victim to natural disasters that mitigated some of the high sea levels, but also made the domes unsafe. Those that remained made their way to a large cavern left behind by volcanic activity. The walls of the cavern gave them shelter, and seawater had accumulated inside the cavern, which still held sea creatures that the humans ate for sustenance. The scientists in this group were appointed to essentially lead this new civilization, thinking it would help in building a habitable ecosystem that reminds them of the Earth they once knew, and they called it Alterna. They even went as far as to use their resources to 3D print monuments and artifacts landmarks that reminded them of Earth, which is why these fucking things are everywhere in Splatoon 3. They also created a computer to keep a record of any knowledge and information they remembered and have learned since, known as the Omniscient Recording Computer of Alterna, or ORCA for short. During some of the scientists' research, they found that they were able to make liquid crystals from the bodily fluids of squids. To quote from the logs themselves, these new crystals could change color in response to faint and fleeting electrical signals emitted by living organisms, aka they could read minds, and project imagery that reflected a person's thoughts. So they figure out how to put these memories onto screens made of these crystals, and after 25 years since the war, they form a dome with those screens over the cavern that recreates the sky as they once knew it. Time passed and Alterna was extremely successful. Eventually a new generation was born and raised in Alterna, and the original scientists appointed new leaders from this generation. But of course, no one's allowed to be happy for too long. This new generation, having never seen the real sky, started to hate the fake ones their elders had created. So they were like, we deserve to see the real sky. And the elders were like, no, that's literally a terrible idea and you will die. And the scientists were like, fuck you, we're building a rocket. So that's what they did. When they launched it, the energy from the rocket boosters overloaded the crystals, causing the stone walls of the cavern to collapse on Alterna, crushing almost everyone inside. Anyone that didn't die immediately ended up dying later, and humanity is now gone for good. Once again, the only thriving species to survive was the sea creatures, whose habitat was now infested with the debris and remains of Alterna, including fragments of the liquid crystal screens. The more they broke apart, the easier it was for sea creatures, especially mollusks and cephalopods, to absorb it into their bodies. These fragments still contain the hopes, desires, and memories of humans, and the sea creatures began to start learning, thinking, and adapting. With this also came the human desire to return to the surface, and after many years and the water levels finally beginning to decrease, the sea creatures followed that desire and spread themselves across many corners of this new world. So there are two sections of this new world that we're going to be focusing on, that being Incadia and the Splatlands. It's unclear when these sections were established or if they're even the only two sections at all, but on the official Splatoon map released by Nintendo, these are the only two sections that are there. Because these new life forms evolved on human thought, they also formed their own cultures and ways of life based on the previous humans, which also differentiated depending on what part of the world each creature settled in. It was clear that the squid and the octopi were among the most advanced of any species that had surfaced, not only because they were more intelligent, but also because they had, and I quote, fresh vibes. 5,000 years after the sea creatures made their way to land, a squid was born that looked more humanoid than anything else had thus far. I'm going to quote directly from the Alterna logs here because I just think it's funny how they described it. Quote, yes, this individual was embraced as a prophet, gifted with numerous revelations that they shared among their fellow squids. It was another turning point for squid kind. During this period, the foundations for modern cephalopod civilization were laid. That individual squid is now widely known and celebrated as the progenitor of the modern day inkling, end quote. So basically it was Squid Jesus. And although it's not said, I'm just going to assume the same thing happened for the octopi because the octopi evolved in the same way. Inklings and octolings are the species that you play as in the game itself. They have the ability to switch between their humanoid form and their more traditional squid or octopus form. From here on out, I'm going to be referring to inklings and octolings collectively as Inkfish. As far as I know, that's the only canonical term for both of them together. Another confusing thing is that octarians and octolings are different, kinda. All octolings are octarians, but not all octarians are octolings. Octarians also refer to the sentient octopus-like enemies that you see in the story campaigns. As far as I know, inklings don't have anything similar. The octarians that aren't octolings are made from being cut from a host, and from there they gain sentience. And I kind of said this before, but other sea creatures also evolved and gained intelligence, including jellyfish, sea anemones, sea urchins, crustaceans, and some other types of fish, including salmon, who will be important later. I'm going to mention the great zapfish really quick because I'm not sure where else to mention it, but the great zapfish is a species of catfish that evolved to produce electric currents, giving electricity to this new civilization. They specifically mention that the great zapfish in Splatoon 1's hub, Ingopolis, is 100 years old at the time of the game, but it's implied that they've used zapfish in general for much longer. Jumping ahead a bit, Judd, the cat, finally wakes up from his cryosleep. It was stated in Splatoon 1's Sunken Scroll 27 that the cryosleep would last for 10,000 years, so this lines up with Sunken Scroll 4, which details the uncovering of this hieroglyph dated 2,000 years before the events of the first Splatoon game. It shows us what early forms of turf war looked like, saying that the 4 versus 4 format had already been established at this point. Judd is placed in between two scales, meaning his ability to judge which side is winning was taken advantage of by the Inkfish, which is also something we see in game, as he is the character that shows up when the scores are calculated. While it does only show Inklings here, it's assumed that both races were still playing turf war together at this time. Now, if you don't know what's about to happen, you're probably wondering, what do you mean still? So about that, as far as we know, over those 12,000 years, Inklings and Octarians lived together peacefully. But let's not forget what gave them the ability to think and evolve in the first place. Human thought. And with human thought comes the insatiable desire to destroy everything that gives them life. AKA, the sea level started to rise once again. But wait, they're sea creatures, can't they swim in water? So No, actually. When they evolved and moved to land, their skin became too thin and permeable as a result of being able to transform so easily. And coming into contact with water causes it to essentially dissolve, causing Inkfish to disintegrate, releasing ink everywhere. So rising sea levels are actually like a huge issue. With Inkfish still being the dominant species, they decided to also do what humans do best: start a war. 100 years before the events of Splatoon 1, the Great Turf War began. This is where we meet Captain Crate Cuttlefish, the captain of the Squidbeak Splatoon, and DJ Octavio, the leader of the Octarians and their army. Sunken Scroll 15 shows us the only surviving photo of the Squidbeak Splatoon, where we see a young Cuttlefish, a Horseshoe Crab character, Judd the cat, and 2 unidentified Inklings. The Horseshoe Crab's name is Moses Schellendorf, an ancestor of the recurring character Sheldon, who runs Ammonites, the shop where players purchase their weapons. He was also responsible for creating many of the weapons we now play with in the games today. Just a fun fact. It's confirmed that Captain Cuttlefish was born 20 years before the war, making him 120 years old at the time of the first game. Because Sunken Scroll 16 is actually a picture of Cuttlefish and Octavio, we can assume that Octavio was around the same age. How they survived the song actually brings up an interesting question of how long Inkfish live. It's said that Cuttlefish has been able to survive that long by drying his body out, but Octavio is permanently in his octopus form, and so it's not clear how long they live, just that there are ways for them to prolong their lifespan. Anyway, the Inklings and Octarians began fighting over land. The earlier battles of the war were won mostly by the Octarians, specifically because the Inklings could not wake up early enough in the morning to defend themselves. True story. The Octarians were actually much more technologically advanced, building what are known as the Great Octo weapons that secured many victories over the Inklings. However, they also decided it would be a great idea to power these things with a single plug, which got pulled in the middle of battle, giving the Inklings the upper hand. The tides turned entirely in the Inklings' favor, completely defeating the Octarians and claiming a majority of the surface land for themselves. Historians state that their victory was mostly due to their superior number of limbs, but that's up to you if you want to believe that. As for how long the war lasted, we know it was at least a year, but it very well could have been longer than that. Following their loss, the Octarians were forced to spread to the remaining land that the Inklings didn't claim, but mostly fled underground, inhabiting the domes left behind from one of the humans' attempts at survival that I mentioned earlier. They did not take this loss lightly, and over the next 100 years, Octarian society, still under the rule of DJ Octavio, was dedicated to becoming even more technologically advanced, building new weapons and devices to one day enact revenge against the Inklings. In terms of what the Inklings were doing over those 100 years, they were just kind of chilling, to be honest. After a while, Turf War became a sport again rather than keeping the violent connotation it had developed during the war. So not to get too confusing, but we're actually going to go back for a second, because despite what it may seem, not everyone was affected by the Great Turf War. Like I said before, the sea creatures split up and formed their own cultures and ways of life in different parts of the world. Some of those creatures continued to live harmoniously with each other even after the rising sea levels, specifically the Splatlands. So yeah, the Splatlands were actually chilling this whole time and had nothing to do with Great Turf War. When the water did rise initially in the Splatlands, it ended up causing a huge flood, but 3 lights appeared in the sky which seemed to calm the storm and made the sea levels go down. These light symbols were then regarded as holy, with the Splatlandians beginning to throw festivals with shrines depicting each symbol in their honor. These early festivals were actually the predecessor to what we now know as Splatfests, but I'll better explain what the Splatfests are soon. From the 3 symbols came 3 families that had centuries-long significance in the Splatlands. This first symbol represents the Hohojiro clan, a family of shark tamers. This one represents the Onaga clan, a family of eel tamers. The final symbol represents a family that doesn't have a specific name, but they are a family of manta rays that have a talent for music and dance. Keep these families in mind because we will see them later. All you need to know for now is that their history is what stopped the Splatlands from meeting a similar fate to Encadia. Time goes on in Encadia. Inklings are thriving on the surface while Octarians remain underground. Crate Cuttlefish grows old, having his own children and eventually grandchildren. 2 of those grandchildren are Inkling girls named Callie and Marie, born at least 17 years before the events of Splatoon 1. The 2 were inseparable, given they lived in the same town, Calamari County, and together they both discovered their love for music. They heard about a youth folk singing competition that was being started in Inkopolis, which is a city in Encadia, and decided to enter. They actually ended up winning and knew that music was their calling from there. The winning song they performed is presumed to be what's called the Chorus of Calamari County, a traditional folk song from the region it's named after with an accompanying dance. Quoting from Splatoon 1 Sunken Scroll 23, nowadays this song and dance may as well be carved into the very DNA of all Inklings. It began as a way to celebrate and show respect for the bounty of the sea. In the years following, other Inklings attempted to find the same success at the same singing competition. Another girl named Pearl Hazuki was one of those people. Born 4 years before Callie and Marie, Pearl is from a very rich family living in Calamari County. She also had taken a liking to music at a very young age and tried her hand at the competition. Turns out her voice was so powerful that it caused a shockwave, busting all of the speakers. So she didn't see the same success Callie and Marie already had, but her love of music and performing wasn't diminished in the slightest. However, we'll continue that story a bit later. Now, what about underground? Is there anyone important there? Yes, actually. So, about 16 years before Splatoon 1, an Octoling girl named Marina was born. Given the goals of Octarian society, Octarians born post-war were essentially put straight to work. At 6 years old, she was put into an elementary training facility at Slimeskin Garrison. After proving herself to be extremely smart, she graduated the program after having skipped multiple grades and joining the elite training facility at age 9. It's here she meets another Octoling named Oct, who had a bit of a reputation for being a delinquent. Nonetheless, they became good friends. Marina realized her talent for mechanics and at age 10 was even a part of the designer team for a major field weapon called the Flutter. When she turned 13, she joined the Slimeskin Garrison officially and was put to work on the great Octo weapons themselves. Sorry to blue ball you on another character introduction, but this one will also have to continue later. Around the same time Marina was born, the Ho'ojiro, Onaga, and Manta Ray clans welcomed newest members of their families, that being the Octoling Shiver, the Inkling Fry, and the Manta Ray, Mantataro Kazemon Munikio, or Big Man for short. Since their families were close, they met each other when they were young, but didn't become good friends until middle school. Fry and Shiver happened to be in the same class at first, both discovering their love for singing. They would sing together often until they realized that being by themselves wasn't going to cut it in the long run, and had heard Big Man was getting into the instrumental side of things. They actually thought they wanted to fight him when they approached, but they actually just wanted him to back up their vocals. So that's what they did, and they've been friends ever since. Skipping ahead a bit, Callie and Marie are now 17 years old and decided it was time to follow their passion for music into the city of Inkopolis. From here on out, they begin to refer to themselves together as the Squid sisters, because the Squid cousin sounds dumb as fuck. They get an apartment together and take up part-time jobs to make ends meet. Soon enough, however, their music started to gain notoriety, and people started to learn who they were. They were eventually offered a job to host Inkopolis News, and the rest is history. Meanwhile, underground, the Octarians are having a hard time. While the Inklings had the Great Zapfish, the Octarians had what they called the Great Octarian. It's an artificial sun seemingly left behind by the humans to generate warmth as well as power to the domes. Unfortunately, the sun's power had begun to diminish, making some of the domes uninhabitable. To fix this, a team of Octarians devised a plan to steal the Great Zapfish from Inkopolis. This plan ends up being successful, leaving Inkopolis to fend for themselves with a diminishing supply of power that won't last forever. Life in Inkopolis is simple. You tune into Inkopolis News, you watch the Squid Sisters tell you what stages are in rotation, and you play goddamn turf war like it's the only thing that matters. Because in a way, it is. It's unclear how Inkfish age, with some diagrams showing the process but not saying what happens at what age. The only thing we are certain of is that turning 14 is like a rite of passage, as it's the age where the ability to transform from squid to kid finally develops. At this point, the only things Inkfish care about are fashion, music, and motherfucking turf war. Most move to whatever place is most popular, and at this point it's Inkopolis. One kid in particular is more special because they thought it would be a great idea to follow an old man into a sewer drain almost as soon as they moved to Inkopolis. While it would be so funny to say this was some random ass old man, it was actually Captain Cuttlefish, who tells this Inkling that he suspects the Octarian stole the Great Zapfish, but no one believes him. He says he needs help traversing Octo Valley, which is Octarian territory, to try and find the Great Zapfish and return it to Inkopolis. The Inkling doesn't say anything, so he takes their silence as a yes. The Inkling is then dubbed Agent 3 of the new Squid Beak Splatoon. Agent 3 specifically because there are already Agents 1 and 2. Who are they? Take a wild guess. So Agent 3 is suited up and sent on their way, battling through Octo Valley, collecting Zapfish along the way. Each level is entered through a kettle, which the Octarians use to move about the valley. The smaller Zapfish are now being used to power the great Octo weapons, which serve as the boss battles of the story campaign, because we already know using a plug and a wire was not the smartest idea. About halfway through Octo Valley, someone intercepts the radio being used between Cuttlefish and Agent 3, before ultimately kidnapping Cuttlefish. With him now being MIA, Agents 1 and 2 finally step in, officially introducing themselves to Agent 3. I should also mention that there are a few stages that feature Octolings as enemies. This is the first time we are introduced to the concept of Octolings in the game series, and presumably the first time any of the characters involved in the campaign have ever even seen an Octoling. Eventually, Agent 3 makes it to the final battle where a UFO device takes them into space, I guess. I don't know, where the Great Zapfish finally appears in all its glory. Beside it, we see Captain Cuttlefish tied up, warning Agent 3 to not get any closer because it's a trap. But Agents 1 and 2 are like, how else are we gonna get it? So 3 goes forward and walks right into the trap. The Great Zapfish gets sucked into this giant flying contraption called the Octobot King, where we finally see the man, or octopus, behind it all, DJ Octavio. He starts mixing an absolute banger on his DJ table before firing various projectiles at a 14-year-old. Things are going well, but Octavio's not willing to give up that easily. Luckily, Agents 1 and 2 override his radio channel and begin to sing a song so life-changing that it drastically affects multiple storylines and characters from here on out. The Calamari Incantation. Having roots in the chorus of Calamari County, same song having been described as being carved into the very DNA of all Inklings, it doesn't take long for the effects of the song to kick in. It's quite literally so fire that DJ Octavio begins to dance uncontrollably, and Cuttlefish breaks free of his restraints, claiming it's quote-unquote that heavenly melody, and officially revealing that Agents 1 and 2 are the Squid sisters. Since Agent 3 is an Inkling, they also get pumped up, and with Octavio being off his guard, Agent 3 is able to defeat him and finally take back the Great Sapfish. Callie and Marie officially announce its return without mentioning how or why, and going back to Octo Valley after the fact, Cuttlefish tells Agent 3 that it's best not to tell anyone what they did in the end. So basically Agent 3 gets no credit whatsoever. Octavio also gets put in a snow globe, like, yeah, sure, I guess. But let's go back for a second. So remember Marina? She is now 16 and it has been told that they're moving her up to the Wasabi Supplying Unit, which is the rank that works directly under DJ Octavio. This also means that she's going to be moving to a different section away from the Slimeskin garrison. She tells Oct this, her friend from before, and Oct is as supportive as they can be. So Marina moves up and Oct runs away from their responsibilities in the army to pursue a music and DJ career, working at a club themselves and Marina would sneak off to. Eventually music ended up becoming all they thought about, so much so that they did something extremely drastic in hopes of that being all they could even focus on, but we'll get back to that later. Back to Marina though, one of the responsibilities she was tasked with was to make sure that Octavio's plan of stealing the Great Sapfish went smoothly, meaning she was also with the fight between Agent 3 and Octavio, as were many other Octarians. Of course, their initial hopes was that their leader would prevail, until the Calamari incantation started to play. All it took was one song to cause her entire world to come crashing down in front of her. It opened her eyes, and according to a witness that was there with her, she had said, quote unquote, "This changes everything," before disappearing from Octarian society altogether. She makes her way up to Mount Nantai, a mountain range not far from Inkopolis, with half of a busted keyboard, her laptop, and a dream. It's there she meets a now 19-year-old Pearl Hozuki, who's currently recouping from a failed punk music career. Her reason for being on Mount Dantai was to actually use her powerful voice without any consequences, giving it had destroyed venues in the past. To Pearl, their initial meeting was something that happened by chance, so she left that day without saying much. Marina goes back to the mountain every day for a week, hoping to see Pearl again, and sure enough, Pearl does come back. Not from Marina at first, but she hears her singing and decides to follow the sound. Marina had actually been working on a song, hoping to impress Pearl with her music rather than her words, given they didn't speak the same language at this time. Luckily, Pearl was impressed, and after Marina's insistence on wanting to start a band with her, Pearl agrees. Thus, Off the Hook was formed. I'll mention here that Pearl actually has no clue that Marina is an Octoling. She just assumes that Marina is from the country and speaks a different dialect of the Inkling language. She also just assumes that her different looking hair is also a result of her culture. But anyway, we won't hear about them again for a bit. Let's actually talk about that big fight again for a second, because Marina wasn't the only important person there. We don't know their name just yet, and this is also a character that's unclear how old they are. I actually tried asking my Twitter followers and there was not a straight answer. Minor spoiler alert, but this character gets officially introduced in Splatoon 2, so just to make things easier, I'm going to go by this answer from a developer interview stating that the Octolings and Inklings in Splatoon 2 are 14 years old, which would make them 12 years old during the Splatoon 1 boss fight. They were training in the Octarian army and were touched by the Calamari incantation in the same way Marina was, so they knew they had to escape Octarian society. It's unclear if they left at the same time as Marina or if they left later, but we'll meet them again soon. So Splatfest are recurring cultural festivals in the Splatoon universe that have Inkfish choose a side and fight for it. The choices come from a 12,000-year-old fax machine that survived all of these years, which receives prompts that humans from the past would have had discussions about. The Inkfish actually see this machine as a god of sorts, as the messages come at random, and they see it as the quote-unquote voice from on high. Part of the Squid sisters' jobs on Inkopolis News is to host these festivals monthly, but as usual, all good things must come to an end. At the end of Splatoon 1's update cycle, they held the final Splatfest, Callie versus Marie. Pitting two cousins against each other cannot be that healthy, can it? Well, the girls themselves seem to be fine with it, right? Anyway, Marie ends up winning, life goes on in Inkopolis, and with that, we can finish the chapter of Splatoon 1. If only it was that easy, if only Splatoon 1 could have ended without something going wrong, but here we are. The Squid Sisters Stories is a short story released in multiple parts between the end of Splatoon 1 and the release of Splatoon 2. It begins by saying that it's been 9 months since the final Splatfest, but reminisces at first, talking about how despite Marie's win and Callie's loss, there was no ill will between the two, or so it seemed. The final Splatfest made the Squid Sisters even more famous, and with that fame came a busy-ass schedule. They still lived together despite that, in the same apartment they got when they first moved to Inkopolis. The solo songs they released during Splatoon, those being Marie's Tide Goes Out and Callie's Bomb Rush Blush, also ended up getting more popular, which pushes them into pursuing solo endeavors outside of the Squid Sisters as a duo. Maria starts her own podcast as well as makes appearances on music shows and doing her own solo performances. Callie, however, with her more outgoing personality, books variety shows and TV dramas, resulting in many nights where Callie doesn't come back to the apartment at all. More days go by and they spend less and less time with each other. With some rare time off, Marie is chilling in the apartment when she starts to consider something she hadn't before, that being if Callie was truly as unaffected by the Splatfest results as she appears to be. Marie quickly doubts herself, wondering if winning the final Splatfest had given her a superiority complex, and she kinda started to hate herself for it. Callie finally gets a day off when her schedule changes unexpectedly, so she decides to make the most of it and spend some time with Marie. She notes to herself that she had noticed Marie seeming a little sad lately, like something had been on her mind. She finds Marie out with Krusty Sean, a character that at this point runs the shoe store in Inkopolis. Callie notices that she seems to be having a great time with someone other than her, so she decides not to interrupt and goes back to the apartment. Eventually Marie returns as well, to which Callie invites Marie out to go shopping. Marie agrees and they head out together. They shop for a bit before getting something to eat. They gossip and talk like they always have. Callie mentions she saw Marie with Krusty Sean earlier, which Marie is a bit put off by, but brushes it off as they continue the conversation. They talk about how many of the vendors in Inkopolis, Krusty Sean included, are closing up shop or moving to new locations. Where that is, I won't say yet, but they also mention how they haven't seen their grandfather in a minute. Though now that the Octarians had retreated, there isn't much cause for alarm. They talk until the sunset, and they remembered how much fun they would have together. So things seem to be looking up for both of them. Until Marie finally gets a rare 3 days off and decides to go home to Calamari County. She invites Callie to join her, but Callie has an appointment that day and can't come with her. However, she promises to come the next day because she'll be free then. So Marie gets to Calamari County where she meets with her parents. During a conversation with them, they begin to ask about Callie, and Marie realizes she's actually struggling to answer their questions about her. She comes to the realization that she actually has no idea how Callie is doing. She goes to bed, anticipating Callie's arrival the next day. She gets to the station as early as she can for the first train from Inkopolis, which Callie is not on. Marie assumes that she overslept and waits for the next train, which she is not on either. She's also not on the next one, or the one after that, or the one after that. Suddenly, the sun has set and Marie is completely panicking. She calls Callie's manager, who tells her that she immediately left after her appointment, assuming she left for the train station. Marie decides to cut her trip short and go back to Inkopolis in search of Callie. She's on her phone the entire way trying to pinpoint her location or wait for a response from Callie, which doesn't come. Their apartment looks the same as they left it, so Callie wasn't there either. She decides to check out Octo Valley in hopes Cuttlefish had seen something, but he wasn't there either. He's actually out on missions with Agent 3 at this time, but she won't get the letter he sends her about it until later. As if Marie's day couldn't get any worse, the snow globe that Octavio was in was completely shattered with no sign of Octavio. She gets back to Inkopolis to find that the Great Zapfish was stolen again. Eventually, people start to notice Callie's disappearance, and Marie decides to take matters into her own hands despite Captain Cuttlefish's absence. However, she wasn't going to find much help in Inkopolis, so about a 20-minute walk away is a town called Inkopolis Square. It's confusing, I know. It had always been there, but due to a lack of funding and various crimes in the area, it wasn't very popular. That was until they decided to redevelop the area. Suddenly, more and more people flocked to populate it, and soon enough, had left Inkopolis behind in favor of Inkopolis Square. Marie knew that's where she had to go. So by this point, Pearl, now 21, and Marina, now 18, have made a name for themselves as Off the Hook. After the release of a few songs, their newfound notoriety led them to fill the position the Squid sisters had left behind in Inkopolis, that being the host of Inkopolis News. However, their station is based in Inkopolis Square instead. Oh, and remember the cryogenic pod that Judd was in? So someone was cleaning and accidentally unplugged it, and the cloning thing worked, and now there's another cat named Lil Judd. He actually hates Judd, and the fact that he's a clone is actually a source of personal anxiety for him. He's now waiting for an opportunity to stab Judd in the back, so there's that. Anyway, let's move on. Marina and Pearl officially announced the disappearance of the Great Zapfish, but that seems to be a minor issue compared to the announcement of Callie's disappearance, which Pearl and Marina seem to care more about. Now imagine you're 14, you're fresh off the train about to start your new life in Inkopolis Square. You have absolutely no clue what you're doing because you've been an academic weapon your entire life and are just now starting to figure out pop culture and what kids your age are doing. So naturally you see a pretty lady lurking in a sewer drain and decide to follow her in there. This is the life of Agent 4, the newest member of the Squid Splatoon, and our main protagonist for Splatoon 2's story campaign. The pretty lady is obviously Marie, taking a page out of her grandfather's playbook and luring a miner into a sewer to recruit them. This time the sewer leads to Octo Canyon, another piece of Octarian territory. Because Agent 4 has been living under a rock, they have no clue who Marie is or who the Squid sisters are. After Marie's initial shock hearing that, she begins to explain the situation, how the Great Zapfish was stolen again, and how she suspects DJ Octavio and the Octarians are behind this. She notably doesn't mention Callie here, not yet at least, but Agent 4 suits up and they're on their way. The Great Octo Weapons technically aren't in this campaign, instead they're replaced by Octo Bosses, as Marie calls them. They serve the same purpose as the Great Octo Weapons, they're just called something different. After the first couple of sections, there's some interference in the radio that Marie and Agent 4 used to communicate. All we see is an icon with glasses and red glowing eyes. They say something unintelligible, and it's just left at that for the time being. A bit later, Marie finally reveals to Agent 4 her ulterior motives behind wanting to look for the Great Zapfish, and that overall, she really just wants to find her cousin Callie. Agent 4 apparently responds to this and say they already know, which doesn't make a ton of sense given the fact that Marie didn't tell them they were related, but whatever. The radio then gets interrupted again, which comes in more clearly this time as the voice says to leave now very menacingly. Something to note is that the 4th area Agent 4 visits is actually Slime Skin Garrison, where Marina and Octo had been training. More bosses are fought, whatever. Anyway, the voice shows up again, this time clearer, but backwards. Marie questions the voice, asking if they were holding the phone upside down, to which the voice responds saying that they totally were. Marie immediately recognized this as Callie, as one of her quirks was holding the phone upside down in Splatoon 1. The voice insists that they aren't Callie and warns them again to leave before hanging up. Agent 4 fights their way through the final section of Octo Canyon before arriving at the final boss, whose entrance is placed in a UFO similar to Splatoon 1's final boss, except instead of going up, it goes down, presumably into one of the domes. As Agent 4 steps out, they realize they're in an arena filled with Octarians, and in the center is none other than Callie herself. Let me just say this is the best outfit she's ever had and ever will have. Okay, anyway. She turns around, Marie pleads with her, asking her why she would do this, but Callie ignores her and calls for the DJ, who of course is DJ Octavio. The Octobot King 2 rises from the platform before sucking up the Great Zapfish once again, thus beginning the final battle, DJ Octavio featuring Callie. It's not really explained how Callie even ended up here to begin with, so I'll explain that now. So the ongoing energy crisis in Octarian society was beginning to take a toll on DJ Octavio's reputation, so he decided to kidnap Callie to boost his approval ratings, as well as hoping to use her music to further control Octarian society. This works because Bomb Rush Blush was so fire that even the Octarians enjoyed it. However, there is also evidence to suggest that Callie went willingly at first, attempting to hear him out before he took advantage of her, so believe what you want to, I don't really care. Anyway, back to the fight. Before the second phase, DJ Octavio mentions that he remixed Callie's brain, which he doesn't elaborate on, and proceeds to throw projectiles at yet another 14-year-old. After the second phase, Marie tries to get Callie to remember her, which seems to start to work before Callie brushes it off and another round starts. After that, Marie comes in on a flying truck driven by Sheldon, who's low-key been here the entire campaign, but he's more involved with gameplay stuff, so I didn't really mention him, sorry. Anyway, Marie whips out her charger and shoots Callie in the head, like, slay, I guess. But this is actually a good thing, as the glasses she was wearing gets knocked off, as Octavio exclaims that they were actually hypno shades, meaning Callie was being hypnotized this entire time. This kicks off the final round, where the background music is called Title Rush, a mashup of Callie and Marie's solo songs. Agent 4 keeps kicking ass, and at last, Marie brings out a speaker and begins to play the Calamari incantation, which finally helps Callie remember everything as she leaps from the Octobot King 2 and onto the truck, where she begins to perform the song with Marie. It's actually a remix this time called the Spicy Calamari Incantation, but it's still a banger regardless, and bitch, we are so back. Sheldon gives Agent 4 a modded Rainmaker, which is a weapon used in Splatoon's ranked mode, which they used to deliver the final blow to DJ Octavio. The Great Zapfish has once again been returned, this time to Inkopolis Square. Pearl and Marina officially report that the Great Zapfish has been found, as well as Callie. When Agent 4 returns to Octo Canyon after the fact, they're met with Callie and Marie, who thank Agent 4 for their help and say they're going to stay here until Captain Cuttlefish and Agent 3 return. They also show Octavio trapped in the snow globe once again, hoping he won't escape this time. So before we move on, I want to bring up another thing I mentioned earlier. So remember how I said that salmon specifically are going to be important? So here's where they come in. In Splatoon 2, there's a mysterious business that opens up in the square called Grizz Co. It's described as a, quote, fisheries/training company that mainly deals in the exchange of salmon eggs, a valuable resource, unquote. Essentially, it was the only part-time job offered to residents of Inkopolis Square. It's run by a figurehead named Mr. Grizz, who talks to workers via a speaker in a wooded bear statue. Everything is streamlined, so no one has ever seen Mr. Grizz's actual face. The point of the job is to collect salmon eggs from a species called the salmonid, which are the evolution of salmon. There's two variations of eggs, that being the regular orange ones and the larger golden eggs. It's said that the eggs are used as an alternative energy source, which is seemingly why they're being collected by Grizz Co. In the Splatoon 2 art book, it's revealed that the Salmonids and Octarians have a trading agreement where Salmonid will give Octarians their eggs to use for power, and the Octarians will give the Salmonids their technology and weapons. This explains why you collect salmon eggs in all 3 Splatoon story modes. With that though, that is the end of Splatoon 2. Yeah, so we aren't even close to being done with Splatoon 2 because we still have to talk about Peak, aka Octo Expansion. Just to preface, according to the developer Nogami, Octo Expansion takes place a bit after Splatoon 2's main story campaign, but not that long after, so a majority of these 2 stories overlap and take place at the same time. So yeah, remember the Octoling I mentioned before, the one that was at the final fight of Splatoon 1 and didn't have a name yet? So they finally decided to escape Octarian society. During this pursuit, they were stopped and captured by an unknown assailant, who then put them into a vat of some strange liquid that kept them subdued. Not long after though, the vat mechanics failed, child which released them. Unfortunately, whatever this liquid was, they were in there long enough to emerge with no memory of who they are or how they ended up there. All they do know is that they have to escape. They end up in Octo Valley, where they bump into Agent 3 and Captain Cuttlefish, which is where they've been during the main Splatoon 2 story mode. Since they are an Octoling, Agent 3 and Cuttlefish see them as an immediate threat, and 3 doesn't hesitate to start fighting them. Luckily, the Octoling found a weapon in the place where they just escaped from, and was able to defend themselves for a while until someone else they didn't see attacked them and everything went dark. Tuning into Wigopolis News after purchasing the expansion, we'll have Pearl introduce a new segment where they comment on fashion trends in the square. The first thing she mentions is how there are many Inklings with new hairstyles, which Marina uncomfortably acknowledges, knowing full well that these Inklings with weird hairstyles are actually Octolings. Pearl even begins to say that these hairstyles look familiar before Marina cuts her off, and the segment ends with Pearl saying they probably won't be doing this again. After that, you're instructed to walk into an alleyway on the right side of the hub. You're met with the intro I played earlier before whoever you're playing as now opens their eyes and gets jump scared immediately by Captain Cuttlefish hovering over them. He wastes no time trying to wake them up, insisting that, quote, the fight isn't over, unquote, but it would be unfair to continue the fight while they don't have a weapon. And besides, Agent 3 is nowhere to be found at this time, so the fight can't go on regardless. Cuttlefish offers a temporary truce while they both attempt to find a way to escape wherever it is they are now. He introduces himself and asks who they are, which they are then reminded that they have no clue. Cuttlefish mentions that they had heard them humming the calamari incantation before they came to, and asks if it had been etched into their soul the same way it was for the Inklings. He tells them he's heard of this happening to Octarians before, but that it was a rumor back when Agent 3 first bought DJ Octavio, and he wonders if this is somehow related. Cuttlefish tells them that anyone touched by the incantation isn't an enemy and encourages them to stand up. They begin looking at the surroundings, and it seems like they're in some sort of abandoned subway station. Walking further inside, they notice some IV bags with liquids inside similar to that of the liquid they were submerged in. They follow some tracks and come upon a larger station with a telephone sitting in the center. It also happens to be ringing, so the Octoling approaches it to answer. It calls the Octoling user 10,008 and tells them that they're in a place called the Deep Sea Metro. It goes on to explain that its purpose is to help people journey to the Promised Land, which is implied to be the surface. They are then given 2 items, a CQ card and a CQ80, and the telephone stops talking. Cuttlefish says that 10,008 is a bit much, so he opts to address the Octoling as Agent 8 instead, which is what they'll be referred to as from here on out. Suddenly, a train pulls up, so naturally 8 and Cuttlefish get on it. They're greeted by this blue slug thing called Sea Cucumber, who introduces itself as the conductor for the Deep Sea Metro. Explains that this whole underground transportation system is part of a larger company called Kamabo Corporation. The metro is connected to multiple test chambers that Agent 8 will have to go through, collecting these things called the Four Things along the way, which when put together will open the door to the Promised Land. I'll explain here that the Deep Sea Metro, although being underground, is not connected to Octarian society, as it is instead its own society. Yes, the tests are there, but only for subjects who want to take them on. You see other sea creatures on the metro that are just living their lives, honestly. Sea Cucumber also explains how the CQ card and CQ80 works, with the former holding currency needed to take tests, and the latter being used as a multi-purpose device like a map and messenger. 8 is then taken to the first test, where they're met with an Octoling whose skin is bright green with neon blue and green hair, clearly unlike any Octoling we've seen so far. Cuttlefish asks if 8 can talk to them, but the Octoling responds violently, going after 8. After battling multiple of these Octolings, 8 completes the tests, receiving a small item that looks almost like an eraser of an Inkling girl. After returning to the metro car, Sea Cucumber explains that the eraser-looking thing is what's called a mem cake. Mem cakes are memories pressed into physical form and are given to participants after completing the tests. Each mem cake collected is accompanied by a short poem written by 8 that details how they view the world, which is really nice, I think. Soon after, Cuttlefish picks up a signal on his radio, which she assumes is Agent 3. However, the person that answers is actually Pearl, or MC Princess as she calls herself. Marina butts in, asking Pearl why she has no manners, to which Pearl then starts a rap battle against Cuttlefish. Marina cuts them off fairly quickly, saying that they had found a radio on Mount Nantai and asks where they are. Cuttlefish remarks that Mount Nantai is near Octo Valley, where they were before ending up in the metro, and explains that they really don't know where they are other than being underground. Marina is quick to offer assistance, also introducing her own pseudonym DJ Hyperfresh. With Marina being the greatest IT person to ever live, she starts to pinpoint where they are from her laptop. Because there's no more information to go off of yet, Agent 8 continues doing the tests. After completing a few tests, a new person enters the metro car they're in. He introduces himself as Iso Padre, which makes sense because he's an ice pod. He explains to 8 that he was a test subject who had also lost his memories, but gave up after only collecting 2 mem cakes. He becomes interested in 8's mem cakes and will give them gifts in exchange for completing a set of them. He's not really important to be honest, but he's chill as fuck, so I thought I'd mention him. As Agent 8 goes through more tests, along the way they'll receive messages from Pearl, Marina, and Captain Cuttlefish by way of the CQ80's messenger function. Marina messages that they were able to find 8's vague location, and that it had an extremely powerful magnetic force around it, saying that it's powerful enough to bend space-time itself. As if she didn't drop that terrifying bomb of information, she then suggests that they all share photos of themselves to get to know each other. Marina accidentally sends a picture of Pearl during her failed punk career, and Pearl retaliates by sending 2 pictures of Marina, one on the day that she met on Mount Nantai, and another where she's half asleep cuddling a plushy version of Pearl's emblem. Later, Pearl decides to look into Captain Cuttlefish, pulling up a picture of him in battle against DJ DJ Octavio, in what Pearl quotes as being the siege at Arona Castle. Pearl then goes on to compliment Marina when she's not in the chat room, mentioning that she's incredibly smart and had previously built a turf war stage with floating rocks. Cuttlefish quickly notes that making things float is Octarian technology, and Pearl, still not aware that Marina's an Octoling, assumes that he's implying she's working for the Octarian army. Cuttlefish then pulls up his Octarian database, which he has for some reason, and finds the file on Marina, which details her past up until her disappearance from Octarian society. This proves to Pearl that Marina is indeed an Octoling and remembers when Marina told her about the calamari incantation changing her life. She says she knows Marina is a good person and that her past doesn't define who she is now. Cuttlefish gets racist against Octarians, and Pearl threatens him, saying that she will quote-unquote cut a fish if he even thinks about hurting Marina. Marina then enters the chat to find that her past was aired out, to which Cuttlefish responds that he, and I quote, doesn't see species. Marina wonders if she'll still be welcome in Inkopolis if everyone knew she was an Octoling, and Pearl reassures her that they will. Marina mentions that she noticed Agent 8 had been touched by the calamari incantation the same way she had, and says that once you hear it, you can no longer stand to live under the oppression of Octarian society. Later, Pearl and Marina recount the story of how they first met, and also send the demo Marina had shown Pearl that convinced her to start Off the Hook, that being the song Ebb and Flow. Marina then sends a song Pearl had made during her punk phase called Dudes Be Sleeping. They then talk about how they had taken over Inkopolis News when the Squid sisters got big, and share a cute picture of all of them together. In the final chat room session, Pearl talks about how she recently went to Inkopolis Square to get something, and notices how more Octolings are around since she originally noticed them. Marina and Pearl encourage 8 to keep it up so that they can make it to the surface soon too. There's a cute little bonus session where Marie joins the chat and talks to Cuttlefish for a bit, wondering when he'll come home. Cuttlefish says he's protecting Inkopolis with Agent 3 and that he wants seaweed stew for dinner. Marie says she'll make it for him. These are all unlocked the more you play through the DLC, so during all of that, Agent 8 is still fighting for their life in the tests. So remember those weird looking Octolings that were in the first test? Yeah, so every Octarian they've encountered so far in each test has had a similar appearance. Marina takes note of this when she sees them, saying that they look like Octarians but something is weird about them. This leads her to doing some research and finding out that they have no pulse or signs of life, kind of like zombies. I should also mention that each boss that 8 goes against also has a similar appearance, but what's making them look like this is not clear just yet, so we'll move on. Each boss fight rewards 8 with one of the 4 things. After collecting all 4 and bringing them to the telephone, it tells them that they are ready to enter the promised land. When 8 agrees, the phone starts to freak out with purple electricity coming out of it that somehow puts all the pieces together. Even while collecting the things, it's very obvious what it is, and for some reason this doesn't set off any alarm bells for 8 and Cuttlefish, who enter the giant blender when the phone tells them to. By the time Marina points this out, the door is already closing with 8 and Cuttlefish inside. Pearl says that it looks pretty sketchy as they're moved into the glass. The blades of the blender begin to spin as the phone says, quote, ingredients acquisition complete, reformatting matter, unquote. Cuttlefish finally realizes what's going on and begins to plead with the phone to let them out, while both of them pound on the glass. Pearl urges Marina to do something before they get blended alive, but Marina says none of her hacks are working. So for a moment it seems like we're about to watch a double homicide in a video game rated E for everyone, until Agent 3 smashes through the ceiling above them, throwing themselves into the phone, which knocks it off and shatters the glass, before hitting the ground and being knocked unconscious. After hitting the ground, 3 drops what appears to be a blue CQ-80 device, which Marina finds out is actually an employee model holding the blueprints to the entirety of the Deep Sea Metro. They direct Agent 8 to a larger facility placed outside of the central station, which they super jump into. The facility has 7 phases: coccyx, villi, belly, intestinal, diaphragm, peristalsis, and the spinal phases. As 8 progresses through each phase, they gain back means of defending themselves, such as splat bombs, a weapon, and specials. They're also going after an energy core, which will power an elevator that will take them to the surface. I'll also note that in the belly phase, we see a giant floating pool of blue-green liquid with more of those weird-looking Octarians coming out of it. The phone continues to talk to them from where Captain Cuttlefish remained with Agent 3, now in a much more condescending way, since there's no reason for it to hide that it's a genocidal maniac anymore. It asks Agent 8 why they're associating with people like Cuttlefish, Pearl, Marina, and 3, to which Cuttlefish then screams and goes AWOL. After a bit, Marina picks up signals of Agent 3 and Cuttlefish as being up much higher than 8. 8 eventually finds the energy core connecting to the elevator, powering it up. Things seem to be working properly until they don't, because why would it? So the elevator stops about halfway up, revealing Agent 3 to be standing above them on a platform with a tied up Cuttlefish hanging upside down behind them from a UFO. More noticeably, 3 has some of that blue-green ink covering half of their face, making their eyes glow in the same color. Cuttlefish explains that the phone hijacked 3's mind, and 3 jumps down to start attacking Agent 8. After a somewhat difficult battle between the two, Agent 8 comes out victorious, leaving Agent 3 unconscious once more. The elevator continues up, taking them to this long-ass ladder that brings them to the outside. Once Agent 8 gets to the top, they have a nice quiet moment of disbelief as they look out over the horizon to see the sun setting over Inkopolis. Finally, they had made it to the surface. Pearl and Marina fly in with a fleet of helicopters, picking Agent 8, Cuttlefish, and Agent 3 up on a platform. Pearl and Cuttlefish decide it's a great time to start another a rap battle when there actually could not have been a worse time because the platform that 8 was just standing on begins to rise, revealing that the thing they just climbed through was a ginormous human statue called the Nil statue. Looking more closely, the right eye of the statue is open, and inside of it is the telephone, now covered in the same blue-green ink we've seen many times before. It calls itself Commander Tartar and reveals that it is the AI program that the professor had created 12,000 years ago. So yes, the same professor that sold the weapon that ended humanity, and the same professor that owned Judd. So yeah, the AI software I mentioned forever ago, this is it. It further explains its purpose, telling them that it was created to pass the professor's knowledge onto the next life form, and it had hoped that the time would come soon when the sea creature started to become intelligent. However, Tartar says that it was disgusted by what came of them, criticizing the fact that they had race wars despite Inklings and Octolings not being all that different, as well as their obsession with vanity. So with its knowledge, it instead decided to destroy this world and create a new one in its wake, hoping it won't repeat the same mistakes that fallen humanity once did. And if that wasn't fucked up enough, I'm about to explain what this blue-green ink is. Tartar created what it calls this primordial ooze, made from what it considers to be the most genetically superior creatures, that being the previous 10,007 subjects who completed the tests but did not escape the blender and were blended alive into this ink. So yeah, the same ink that Agent 8 was submerged in and the same ink that mind-controlled Agent 3 were actually the blended remains of other test subjects filled with their DNA. Kamabo Co., which is run by Tartar, analyzed that the reason the human race went extinct was because of war, and that this ink is the key to making sure this new race they are creating won't repeat the same mistakes. The corporation was essentially created to gather subjects to create this ink, officially known as sanitized ink. This ink is described as being a way to, quote, purge life's energy so that they no longer cause unnecessary hesitation and instability in the mind. They believe that by analyzing the data of each individual through experimentation, and by combining all of the best individuals together, they can eliminate the general idea of the individual, and from there a new life form could be created and a harmonious world would be born, unquote. In other words, once someone was sanitized, Kamabo Co. had full control over them. It's implied that any Octarian who tried and failed the tests were the ones who became the test subjects of the ink itself, either by way of submerging them in the ink or injecting it directly as evidenced by the IV bags. This turns them into sanitized Octarians, which also makes them blue and green. So this explains a couple of things now that we know this info. First being that it explains why Marina found no signs of life in those that were sanitized, and why 8 lost their memories. Agent 8 was sanitized just enough to have their memories extracted, but not enough to be controlled. There's also someone I mentioned before that's been affected by this as well, but we'll get back to that later. The statue's mouth begins to open, revealing a large cannon connected to multiple blenders full of the ink that's pointed directly at Inkopolis. Marina realizes that it's gaining its power from the sun, so she comes up with a plan to cover the entire statue in ink to stop it from charging. She shows them all her prototype hyper bombs that can be stuck to the surface of the statue, but she tells 8 that they will have to detonate them manually. She then needs Pearl to use her voice to hit it with a quote-unquote full power battle cry, presumably to overload it and stop it once and for all. With 3 minutes on the clock, 8 gets to work, with 2 of Off the Hook's bangers playing in the background, that being Fly Octo Fly and Ebb and Flow Octo version. Just a side note, if Agent 8 does not defeat Nils in 3 minutes, there's some imagery of Inkopolis being covered in the blue-green ink as the other characters say some stuff about the world ending and all that, but good thing that doesn't happen. Agent 8 kicks ass as per usual, detonating all the hyper bombs in under 3 minutes. 8 super jumps back to the helicopter platform where Marina tells them that while it's not at full charge anymore, it still looks like it's going to fire. Tartar monologues saying that no one has worked so hard to stop it before, and that it will be sure to blend aid to create the perfect world the professor had envisioned. Just as it's about to fire, Pearl jumps down onto the platform and pulls out what she calls the Princess Cannon, which is just a giant killer whale special. She screams booyah so loud into the cannon that it competes directly with the beam being shot by Tartar. After a few seconds of back and forth, Pearl's voice overpowers it, flooding the statue with ink from the inside out. It then cuts to Tartar, who starts tweaking and screams before it fades to white. Pearl and Marina have their little gay moment, Cuttlefish dances in the background, 3 finally wakes the fuck up, and 8 smiles, knowing they're finally free to live their life on the surface. But because none of these Inkfish can ever catch a fucking break, this will not be the last we see of Agent 8. So the Great Zapfish is back, Octolings are living happily on the surface. Now what? So yeah, actually 2 years have passed and it's time for another final Splatfest, this time being the Splatpocalypse. The options are Chaos versus Order, with Pearl representing Team Chaos and Marina representing Team Order. It's much more hyped up this time around, with the in-game characters choosing sides, and it also lasting 3 days total, with new versions of songs and new stages as well. But 3 days come and go with Team Chaos taking the win, and that is finally the end of Splatoon 2. After the final fest, Pearl and Marina decide to step away from Inkopolis news, but further into the spotlight with their announcement of a world tour. Marina at the same time starts to consider something. Kamabo Co. has been in disarray since Agent 8 defeated Tartar and has presumably stopped all operations related to sanitization. But after seeing the effects that sanitization had on the Octarian population, her own people, she wonders if there's something she can do about it. As the tour starts gearing up, she drafts an idea for what she's calling Project Memverse, a virtual reality world which aims to address the effects of sanitization and hope to reverse them. She begins by modeling a digital clone of Inkopolis square, which will act as a temporary storehouse for memories. Eventually, she's able to hack into Kamaboko's system, finding that Kamaboko had been running the Deep Sea Metro for a very long time and kept people under their control through sanitization. She also notes that it's entirely possible that everyone from Slimeskin Garrison, as well as her job under the Wasabi Supply Unit, could have been sanitized by now, which is sad as fuck. Eventually, she gets into Commander Tartar's files, which has a much more detailed explanation on sanitization and what it does. I'm going to quote directly from the game itself because I don't think I can explain it any better. Quote, sanitization extracts the subject's thoughts and memories. These are saved as memcakes. Post-sanitization, the structure housing the subject's soul is left as a hollow husk. Injecting dummy information into that husk enables total control of the original subject, end quote. So this dummy information is the DNA left behind by the blended remains of the successful test subjects. Marina theorizes that returning the correct memcakes to a sanitized soul might reverse the process, which she's partly right, given receiving memcakes is how 8 got their memories back, but also remember that 8 wasn't fully sanitized, so the situation for others is likely more complicated. This also confirms that souls are a tangible part of an Inkfish's body. I've heard people say that the little ghost that flies away when you get splatted in the game is the soul, which would make sense, so I'm gonna go with that. It also re-emphasizes how important the calamari incantation is, given it's described as being etched into people's souls. Oh yeah, and the tour is about to start, I guess. After analyzing memcakes from both Agent 8 and Cuttlefish, Marina ends up going to a Kamaboko warehouse where she finds what she calls a trash dump of memcakes. She has no way of knowing which ones belong to who, or rather if each memcake is its own individual memory or multiple memories compressed into one memcake, possibly from more than one Octarian. She berates Tartar for not managing data properly, which, like, true, everyone should be doing that. She wonders if, quote, by taking the thoughts and memories stored in memcakes and mixing them up further and setting them up with the basic framework of a soul, in theory, they could sift through them and select the ones where they belong, end quote. She thinks she can turn the memcakes into data and put that data into the Memverse. Development is in full swing now. She connects the Memverse to Kamaboko's mainframe, which brings in data from the memcakes. She then creates an access point to the Memverse via Sea Cucumber phone, which is the phone everyone has in Splatoon 3. A person's soul is represented by a palette, and their memories take the form of color chips, which when the user gets color chips, it will establish a connection with compatible memories. She aims to have users complete tests to regain those memories, as adversity creates retention. The test will be in a tower, which the user has to climb in order to receive their memories. The top floor will complete the processing, returning the soul to its original state with its original memories. There's also a mention of her wanting to hire someone for system security, and she considers, quote, that person Cuttlefish introduced her to, unquote, for help, that person being Agent 4. 8 will actually be accompanying them on the tour, so Marina hopes they'll be the first test subject. The tour finally starts, but Marina finds herself biting off more than she can chew, talking about how she's sacrificing sleep to work on the Memverse after performing live. She says she can work on it more during the break they'll have halfway through the tour, but isn't sure how much time she'll have, so she ends up contacting some engineers she knew from the underground, and a few people are down to help her with development. She mentions that there's a security loophole with Sea Cucumber phones that could theoretically allow anyone with a Sea Cucumber phone to be pulled into the Memverse against their will if it's exploited. She makes a note to warn the phone company about this, but I'm sure you can guess how that goes. So the tour goes on with Project Memverse on the back burner for now, but on a fun note, Pearl and Marina actually discover a band called Damp Socks while on tour and decide to start a new group with them called Damp Socks featuring Off the Hook. As I've mentioned already, the Splatlands is the only other large land section on the map mentioned in canon, and this is where we're going next. Following Team Chaos's win, much like last time around, everyone was eager to follow this new trend of chaoticness, so everyone set their sights on the Splatlands, more specifically a city called Splatsville. It's much further away this time, being about a 4-hour drive away from Inkopolis and Inkopolis Square, and as far as we know, is surrounded on all sides by a huge desert. Now in their early 20s, Shiver, Fry, and Big Man have since created their trio music group called Deep Cut, who have been big in the Splatlands for a while, so much so that they are eventually given an offer to host Splatsville's version of the news called the Anarchy Splatcast. And guess what happens, by the way? The great Zapfish gets stolen. Again, Deep Cut announces this, and of course, if they don't get it back soon, it's lights out. What about the new Squid Splatoon though? Where have they been? I'm gonna be straight up, Agent 4, who's 19 now, is nowhere to be found, and not in any concerning way. It's implied that they're getting their degree or something. But Captain Cuttlefish is actually no longer captain, deciding to retire and pass the torch on to Agent 3, who's now known as Captain 3. They're also 21 now, by the way. Callie and Marie, now 26, are still Agents 1 and 2. And oh yeah, speaking of Marie, she's still doing her podcast. She does an episode with Callie where they just kept yapping, going 5 hours overtime, and I just thought that was funny. Now imagine you're 14. Again, you've grown up in Splatsville your whole life, and along the way you've acquired a little small fry buddy that's wandered away from the salmonid waters. You collect and sell junk that you find in the desert and play turf war on the side. Life is good, until you see some old guy in a super drain and decide to follow him in there because that's how the story goes. We all know this. We move to the crater, which is just outside of Splatsville, and Cuttlefish greets this new Inkfish, because you can now play as an Inkling or an Octoling from the start this time, by immediately yelling about how the Octarians are coming. Since the Octarians stole the great Zapfish the first 2 times, Cuttlefish assumes they've stolen it again, and recruits another 14-year-old to, quote-unquote, Save the world. Cuttlefish calls them Agent 3 because the old Agent 3 is captain now, so they have that title. I know it's confusing, so from now on the old Agent 3 is called Captain or the Captain, and this new Inkfish is called Agent 3. With that, Cuttlefish sends them on their way. The crater is covered with this substance that's like half marbled and half covered in fuzz, and when 3 begins to play through the levels, realizes that the Octarians are also covered in a similar substance, which the characters call fuzzy ooze. When they come into contact with the fuzzy ooze, it takes over their entire body, rendering them useless, but of course we're gonna pretend like that never happens, because the game will just take you back in time to before that happened. That, and the fact that our little buddy, as it's called, can eat it without being harmed. So little buddy clears the way to the first boss, and it's Octavio. Octavio says something interesting, that all of the Octarian troops have gone missing, and he starts blaming Cuttlefish for that. Agent 3 fights Octavio, and it's almost too easy to beat him this time. Cuttlefish wonders if he's even been using the Great Sapfish's power at all, to which Octavio replies that he doesn't have it. Before they can ask any more questions, the fuzzy ooze leaks through the cracks, collapsing the ground beneath them, making it fall away. The ooze grabs Cuttlefish and pulls him away from 3, who is left to fall alone into this abyss. 3 sees a flash in front of them, 3 figures standing above them before slipping back into unconsciousness. Eventually, little buddy makes its way back to 3 and wakes them up fully, and now they're somewhere with snow covering the ground, littered with various structures with the blue sky surrounding them, and with a giant rocket in the center, all surrounded by the fuzzy ooze. Welcome back to Alterna. When 3 gets back on their feet, a voice in the distance calls out to them. Following the voice leads them to Agents 1 and 2, aka Callie Marie, and the old Agent 3, who was now the captain of what they're calling the new Squid Beak Splatoon. So they welcome this new Agent 3 in to help them find Cuttlefish. They bring up that they think this place is called Alterna, and that they had no clue it was even beneath the crater. It has 6 different island sites, and Marie says that they're getting the strongest signals from 3 of them. They mention that they had placed a tracker on Cuttlefish given that he seems to wander off often, and that they're getting strong signals that he's nearby. The first level introduces the characters to Orca, so the computer I mentioned earlier that holds all of the knowledge of the alternate citizens. This time, however, it has the ability to track physical and intellectual prowess based on how well Agent 3 does when completing missions. It also gives them access to the Alterna logs containing Alterna's history, which they will collect throughout the levels as they complete them. After completing the missions and striking the cuntiest poses known to man in the first site, little buddy eats the ooze that have been blocking the entrance to the next site. Before they go, they are stopped by the 3 figures 3 saw before, none other than Deep Cut themselves. They introduce themselves and say that the Splatlands are their turf, so that they're the only ones that can loot here. They reveal that the Anarchy Splatcast is a mere day job, and that their real passion lies in being bandits. They also reveal their plan to take pretty much everything from Alterna, deeming it their treasure before being done with the conversation and disappearing into a cloud of smoke. Since they didn't actually do anything to stop them, 3 waltzes over to the next site, which has a strong signal. After completing some missions, 3 makes their way over to the signal and enters the kettle that's there. Inside, they're met with Fry, who uses her ancestral ability to tame eels to sick them on Agent 3. Luckily, 3 kicks her ass, and Fry admits that they're stronger than they look, but that it won't be the last they see of Deep Cut. Unfortunately, the signal was not Cuttlefish, but instead coming from a piece of treasure she had gotten, which 3 takes back to Callie, Marie, and the captain. Soon after, they receive a radio call from Cuttlefish, who says he's trapped in a dark room, but that he'll try to escape in the meantime. Site 3 doesn't have any signal, so moving on to Site 4, the kettle with the strongest signal leads to Shiver, who uses her ancestral ability to tame sharks to stick a giant shark on Agent 3. Once again, Agent 3 kicks her ass, and they receive another piece of treasure instead of Cuttlefish. But after returning, they receive another radio call from Cuttlefish, who starts to whisper because he hears someone coming. An unidentified voice cuts in, straight up introducing himself as Mr. Grizz. So yeah, the same mysterious Mr. Grizz that's been running Salmon Run this whole time. Cuttlefish says he doesn't know who he is before the line goes dead. Site 5 doesn't have a signal either, so moving on to Site 6, we're met with the 3rd and final member of Deep Cut, Big Man. Big Man's fight is actually pretty cool because it is heavily inspired by the Manta Storm fight from Super Mario Sunshine. Cool fun fact aside, Agent 3 kicks his ass with no Cuttlefish, but instead another piece of treasure. There's soon after another radio call from Cuttlefish, who says that he's being held captive by Mr. Grizz, and that he knows that he's up high somewhere. Because he gave away the location, Mr. Grizz makes it known that he's going to deal with Cuttlefish now before he becomes an actual inconvenience. Cuttlefish cries out before the line goes dead. The only place he could realistically be is on the rocket, but the bottom of it is surrounded by way too much fuzzy ooze. Conveniently enough, they also realize that the 3 treasure pieces fit together to make a comically large lawnmower contraption thing, which the captain uses to mow away all of the fuzzy ooze. Now near the rocket, the group is about to climb up until they're stopped by Deep Cut, who wants the treasure. Callie and Marie are like, yeah, sure, you can take it, we don't need it anymore. They're so gagged by this that they apologize to Agent 3 immediately and decide to help them from there on out. As Agent 3 climbs the rocket, we hear Cuttlefish again, now asking why he's tied up. Mr. Grizz replies saying that he needs a representative of Earth and that Cuttlefish was going to help him. Cuttlefish says that he can't do much while he's tied up, and Mr. Grizz assures that he'll be free soon. He then starts to say that the world is out of balance and that no one can run a world or business in this manner. He says that mammals and marine creatures have traded places in terms of the dominant species on Earth, and that he isn't a fan of that. And there is a reason for that. So before we go any further, actually, we're going to go back for a second. So remember the Arc Polaris? Others decided to put their trust in a rocket called the Arc Polaris that would launch just before the world's ultimate demise in search of a habitable planet elsewhere. Inside were more cryogenic pods that held not only humans, but many animals as well. Eventually, it drifted close enough to Earth that it was pulled back into its orbit, but even more unfortunately, the re-entry was terrible and killed any remaining life form inside, except for one. We'll get back to that later. So that one thing that remained alive, Mr. Grizz. Also known as Bear Number 03, he was an experimental subject brought onto the ship, and whether it was because of those experiments that he survived, we do not know. He remained in the cryogenic pod, but regained consciousness while still inside, so for 12,000 years, he dreamed about what new life he would find, only to realize that he ended up back on Earth, and pretty much all the mammals have gone extinct. With the knowledge he gained during those 12,000 years of thinking, he used the ship's navigation system to discover Alterna, which had long since been devoid of life. He ended up repairing most of Alterna's facilities and researching the liquid crystals that made up the screen dome, and also what happened to give sea creatures intelligence. He eventually figured out that by combining the crystals with his fur, he was able to create a substance that could turn any life on Earth into a mammal, this substance being the fuzzy ooze. So he began stockpiling the fuzzy ooze in the rocket that was left behind in Alterna, somehow still intact despite crashing. This is actually confusing because there is a Salmon Run stage in Splatoon 2 called the Ruins of Arc Polaris, which is exactly what it sounds like. So he either fixed the rocket or there was a second rocket left behind by Alterna originally.
Hi, editing Lucia here. So, I was wrong. Apparently the rocket that Mr. Grizz has like a name. It's called the Spirit Lifter, and it's an entirely separate rocket from the Arc Polaris. I originally thought that he had just rebuilt the Arc Polaris from like the remains that it had, but apparently he just made a new rocket. I don't know what he made it from, but he got the materials, maybe from the Arc Polaris also, but some other things, I have no idea. Anyway, the rocket's called the Spirit Lifter. That's kind of all you need to know now. Thank you.
Anyway, he needed a power source, and he figured out that the golden eggs from the salmonid race can provide that power. So yeah, it turns out that Grizz was created by Mr. Grizz for the sole purpose of collecting enough golden eggs to power his rocket so that he can cover the world in fuzzy ooze and turn everyone into mammals. Which means that if you've ever played Salmon Run, you've directly contributed to this without knowing. So back to the present, the rocket is now ready to launch. Cuttlefish has no clue what Mr. Grizz is talking about. Mr. Grizz says there are 3 components to his business plan: the vessel, the spirit, and the wisdom of ages. Cuttlefish still doesn't understand and begs him not to come any closer. Mr. Grizz says that Cuttlefish's brain contains the essence he needs and begins to do something to him that makes him scream. Callie Marie urge Agent 3 to hurry, but by the time they reach the top, it's too late. On the ground beneath them is a stark, white, dehydrated Captain Cuttlefish. But before they can even attempt to see if he's still alive, Mr. Grizz finally reveals himself to not be any regular bear, but the Ursine anomaly. He's scarily big with glowing white eyes and the ooze sticking onto his fur. Callie Marie tell him to turn Cuttlefish back into Cuttlefish, and Mr. Grizz is like, nah, and takes off the rocket. He reminds them again that he will be coating the planet in fuzzy ooze as he disappears into space. Turning our attention back to Cuttlefish, the captain is holding his dried up body in their arms as a single tear falls from their eye and onto him. Apparently that's all he needed though, because he becomes rehydrated enough to come back to life, except not back to the way he was originally. Marie calls him Squid Jerky, and that's probably the best way I can describe what he looks like now. He also floats for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, Callie remembers that Mr. Grizz is about to fuck the entire Earth, but isn't sure if it's possible to stop him now because he's in space. Deep Cut finally catches up to them saying that they can help, and by help, they mean building a ladder out of Fry's eels that reach into space and using Shiver's Megalodon shark to climb it. And this works, successfully getting Agent 3 to land on the rocket in space along with Little Buddy. The rocket is now covered in fuzzy ooze, which Agent 3 has to dodge with the help of Little Buddy and the golden eggs that are scattered across the rocket in order to reach Mr. Grizz. Eventually they attack him enough to the point where he's impressed by how proactive they are, but if anything it just annoyed him and he launches Agent 3 and Little Buddy off the rocket's surface, flying into space. All hope seems lost until something in the distance comes flying towards Agent 3, catching them. And guess who it is? DJ Octavio and his Octobot King. Octavio says he's not going to let Mr. Grizz get away with turning everyone into mammals, offering his help to Agent 3 and thus officially ending the rivalry between DJ Octavio and the Squid Beak Splatoon. Octavio starts to DJ a remix of that heavenly melody, Calamari Incantation, now featuring Deep Cut. Once again, the song is so fire that it causes Little Buddy to start floating and glowing. Shiver mentions something about how 3 lights united to consume the disaster, this being a reference to the 3 lights in the sky that stopped the flood in the Splatlands all those years ago, as the light flows into Little Buddy, turning it into a giant fucking salmon, or huge fry, as they call it. Not only does Little Buddy get bigger, but unfortunately so does Mr. Grizz, whose eyes now glow red. Marie says that it looks like he's going to bring the fuzzy ooze to Earth himself, and that they have exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds to stop him before the Earth turns into a giant fuzzball. Agent 3 hops into the Octobot King, which now has a pilot hatch and an ink vac, which 3 will have to use to suck up the fuzzballs before Mr. Grizz can bring them to Earth. This is also all while Little Buddy and Mr. Grizz are throwing hands at each other. Eventually, Little Buddy manages to restrain Mr. Grizz, making the last fuzzball easy to target, ultimately destroying any ammo Mr. Grizz had. With all of the fuzzballs now sucked up into the Octobot King, Octavio tells Agent 3 to just start shooting them right back at Mr. Grizz, which they do. Mr. Grizz, now covered in ink, laments that all of his work has been for nothing, and that he just has to accept that things are different now. Moving forward is the future. Mr. Grizz, being a CEO, tells Agent 3 that they will not receive severance pay before the rocket fucking explodes. Like, okay. DG Octavio flies Agent 3 to safety, and Huge Fry turns back into Little Buddy, and it safely tucks itself into 3's backpack as they fly back to Earth. Deep Cut announces that the Great Sapfish has returned on the AFK Splatcast, and when Agent 3 returns to Alterna after the fact, they are congratulated by Callie, Marie, Cuttlefish, and even the captain. Mr. Grizz is seen floating around the Earth in space, and it's implied that little Judd takes over Grizzco now that he's gone. I don't know, the little man seems to be plotting multiple things at once, so who knows. Once again, no one knows that Agent 3 just saved the world because fuck them, I guess. And that is the end of Splatoon 3, the final game in the Splatoon saga. Except I'm lying again, so get your ass back in that chair because it's not over yet. So while all of that was happening, so was the Off the Hook tour, and so was the creation of Project Memverse. The tour's break comes and goes, and Marina makes enough progress to do an official test, which 8 agrees to. Officially calling it Dramatic Days in Orderland, 8, Pearl, and Marina enter the Memverse. After purchasing the DLC and opening the game, Deep Cut announces a special segment called Rumor Filet, where the rumor is about spaced out Inkfish being seen in Inkopolis Square. Shiver notes that she's seen less people from the square playing Turf War, and this could be the reason why. The segment ends with that, and then you're told that the trains run to Inkopolis Square, but that something fishy is going on there, and it's your call whether or not you want to get involved. Bitch, of course we're getting involved, let's go. After going into the station, there's a quick cut scene of your character, or Agent 3 technically, sitting on the train with Little Buddy, before they slowly fall asleep as the screen starts glitching around them and fading to white. In the blank space, there's a voice calling out before fading into a view of Inkopolis Square, if Inkopolis Square was entirely white and devoid of color. The camera pans up to a larger version of the central tower before the voice calls out again, revealing that we are once again Agent 8. I'm actually going to be referring to Agent 8 as just 8 from here on out because in one of Marina's dev diaries, she tells the story of how she thought Agent 8 was too formal, so she called them just 8 one day and they were really happy about it, and I just thought that was cute. Anyway, 8, who was lying seemingly unconscious on the ground, wakes up to the voice coming from a thing flying in front of their face. It's a robot that looks suspiciously like Pearl. Turns out that it is Pearl, and she's unsure why she looks this way. She knows Marina is supposed to be somewhere nearby, but she doesn't know where she went. It's implied that 8 actually can't remember Pearl or Marina, but I personally think this was just a way to introduce Pearl and Marina to players that didn't play Splatoon 2, as this was their first physical appearance in Splatoon 3. Pearl suggests that they go look for Marina when suddenly a staticky voice comes from the tower, calling out for Pearl, which she immediately recognizes as Marina's voice. Marina says some form of "help me" before being abruptly cut off. Pearl then urges 8 to head into the tower so they can get Marina back. Walking into the tower reveals that it looks nothing like the inside of the actual Inkopolis Square tower, with an elevator door at the back of the room and 2 gushers of black ink on either side of it. Suddenly, an inky black fish with a visible skeleton and red eyes comes out of one of the gushers, ready to attack. Pearl materializes some dualies for 8, which 8 uses to defeat the fish. Pearl isn't actually sure where the dualies came from, but that it felt, quote, something she just had inside her, unquote. They make their way over to the elevator, which opens to reveal a sanitized octoling inside. Pearl thinks that they're a threat and urges 8 to fight them too, but the octoling assures them that they're not an enemy and asks if Pearl and 8 had followed Marina's voice here too. Pearl asks how they know Marina as they step into the elevator, and the octoling introduces themselves as Oct, the same Oct that was in the training facility with Marina when she was still underground. Oct explains that they've known Marina for a long time and that they also woke up with no idea of how they got here. They heard Marina's voice from on top of the tower, or spire as they call it, and went to go and find her before the same fish we saw before attacked and injured them. They call the fish gelatins, and then says that they've been stuck in the elevator since getting injured. Pulling a small red chip from their pocket, Oct tells 8 to put the chip into a pallet, which Pearl materializes in front of them. After doing so, Pearl notices that 8's dualies got stronger and says that if they collect more of these chip things, then the gelatins won't be as much of a threat anymore. Pearl asks Oct to take them to the top floor, but Oct tells them that unfortunately they can only go up 1 floor at a time, so they have to deal with that. Each level is task-based with gelatins in the way, and 8 has to complete the task without dying or it's straight back to the beginning. As 8 fights their way up to the top of the spire, there's some dialogue still happening in the elevator. Pearl asks Oct how they know so much about this place, and Oct admits that everything they've mentioned so far they read from the elevator's control console. They said that they had the knowledge to access it because they learned how to at the same school Marina did, even though Marina was a few ranks above them. Pearl laments that all of this had to happen during Off the Hook's world tour, revealing to Oct that Marina had made it big as a music artist on the surface. Pearl also mentions that Marina had seemed burned out lately, and that she promised her that they could find a quiet spot together after the tour was over and take it easy for a while. I'm quoting that directly from the dialogue, by the way, I'm not upping the gay factor here. Sure enough, however, when they get to the top floor, Marina is there, except she's giant, with a visor covering her eyes and her bottom half surrounded by some kind of ooze with wires and tubes sticking out of it. Marina speaks in a robotic voice saying that 8 and the others others are intruders and that grayscaling was commencing. It realizes that they have to go and fight Marina or whatever this was and does as such. After defeating it, the machine lets Marina go, shrinking her back to her normal size. When she comes to, Marina seems like she has no idea what just happened. Before they can even figure that out, a black, staticky, glitching cloud with a face appears in front of them. It says that it is order itself, and that it is a consciousness generated from the processes of many who yearn for stability, saying that it's now fully realized it no longer needed Marina as a host vessel, and physically expels them all out from the top of the spire. Pearl is able to help them land safely, but now they're basically back at square one. The spire is now noticeably covered by this black glitchy static at the top, and they assume that they have to make their way back up to stop whatever this order thing is. Pearl is also back in her human form for now, and Marina says that it was the Dramatic Days in Orderland module that made her like that, as well as doing pretty much everything else that's happened. She reveals that this is the Memverse and explains that the only real thing in the Memverse is their minds. The order program went haywire, exploited the sea cucumber phone loophole, and forcibly connected the minds of many people to the Memverse, which explains why everyone in the real world in Gopolis Square are acting like zombies. Oct walks up and asks if that's how they got pulled in here too, which Marina then apologizes for roping them into her mess. She explains that Order's goal is to create a colorless world of order, where no one has a will of their own, and that it's using the Memverse to make that idea a reality. It uses a process called grayscaling to achieve this, which means that anyone currently trapped in the Memverse will be affected in the real world too. Regardless, the only way to stop any of this is to defeat Order, who is at the top of the tower, so they get back in the elevator and get to work. Now, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of the information we get in the dialogue going through the levels is gameplay related, so I'm gonna talk about the few things that are story related and skip to the top of the tower essentially, so sorry I'm not going through what happens in all 30 floors, but play the game yourself if you want to know. I will talk a bit about one of the bosses though, that being Parallel Cannon. Parallel Cannon is a group boss consisting of robotic looking inklings with nothing on their faces except for bright red circular eyes. It's confirmed that this boss is a copy of Agent 4. If you have save data from Splatoon 2, the game will show the main inkling with whatever hair your Agent 4 had. In an interview, it's explained that Order had heard a rumor of Agent 4 being the most powerful inkling, and since Agent 4's data was already in the Memverse with them being security, Order took that and made a boss out of it. Anyway, as they're going up, Marina admits that deep down she did wish for a perfect world of peace where nothing had to change, and that it was a weakness Order took advantage of. Pearl assures her that whatever she wanted wouldn't have ended up looking like what it looks like right now, and that it's not her fault. Pearl then brings up the bosses and asks how difficult they are, and Marina reminds them of Order's plan to create a colorless world of order, so the challenges had to be hard to make sure no one was going to stop it. Oct mentions that it reminds them where they were before they got here, which Marina asks if they were in the Deep Sea Metro too, and Oct says that they were. They also say that someone or something took their will away, and that they were forced to DJ for it, aka they were sanitized. They say that they don't remember much about their time there, but that they heard this voice, which I'm going to assume is the Kalimari incantation, before trailing off. Marina tells them that she created the Memverse to help reverse the effects of sanitization, and that since Oct seems to have a will of their own again, that it must have worked. Another fun fact, Oct is also known as Deadfish, and was actually introduced as the in-game artist behind the songs you hear in the levels of Octo Expansion. Originally that's all they were going to be, but in a developer interview it's revealed that when they try to think of a companion character like Sea Cucumber or Orca, they thought doing something similar to those would be a bit boring, so they took the Deadfish character and fleshed them out to make Oct. Anyway, they make it to the top floor, and Marina insists she's going to go with 8 and Pearl to face Order. Pearl advises against this, but Oct says that you can't really change Marina's mind once it's set. Oct themselves stays behind in case things go south. Once they open the door, they're met with Order itself, who says that in this world none desire what might be, they embrace what is. Their lives are peaceful ones. Marina tries to reason with it, saying that she can't deny that a chaotic world is scary and uncertain, and that there are times she wished everything could just stay the same forever, but that there's also beauty in chaos too, and not having that certainty is a risk she's willing to take for the people in her life. Order starts tweaking out at the fact that Marina, its creator, would deny it, and that it's going to kill them before going through with its plan. It flies into a sewer grate, re-emerging as a giant inky black skeletal octopus thing called Overlorder, and begins to attack 8. After a somewhat long battle, they seem to have defeated Order until he's like, actually the program is ready, so fuck you. And it flashes through scenes of Splatsville and Ingopolis turning gray, which is like, okay, damn. Marina attempts to shut down Order's program, but says that it's propagating too fast as she begins to turn gray. Oct suddenly runs in from the elevator. They reach for Marina's laptop, but before we can even see if they do anything, everything freezes and turns gray. A white circle appears on the screen. You, as the player, are asked to hit a button to the beat of the song that begins to play. It grows louder and louder as an image of 8 passed out on the ground begins to fade into view, and eventually gets so pumped up by the song that they wake up. Turns out, Oct had just pressed play on a song Marina was working on, and it was so fire that it gave everyone the will to keep going. Marina codes in a DJ station for her and Noct to start live mixing the song on. Order is confused as to why they are resisting, and that happiness is unchanging. Pearl yells back that they're out here living, loser, and uses her powerful voice to once again booyah so hard that it turns everything bright. But Order isn't done just yet. He's weaker now, so 8 has to kick ass one more time before Order is finally defeated for good. Sort of. After Overlorder explodes, something else is in its place. Something very tiny. A tiny octopus named Smollusk, who speaks in baby talk, tries to be intimidating but isn't obviously, and with that there's not much else to worry about. Another elevator appears in front of them, which the group happily steps onto, taking them back to the real Angopolis Square. Off the Hook goes on to finish the tour. Deep Cut announces the new song made by Off the Hook and Deadfish, and that Turf War has made a comeback in Angopolis Square, and it seems like most of the people have also snapped out of their daze since they talked about it last. When 8 goes back to the Memverse, Marina says that there are still issues with the other palettes, and that they have to climb the spire with each of them to truly set everyone free. So that's what 8 does, of course. The more 8 goes up to fight Smollusk, the more story is revealed as to why the Memverse went haywire in the first place. Apparently, the extra engineers Marina hired to help with the Memverse had a subconscious desire for an unchanging world, and those thoughts got mixed into the code, creating order. This happened because living in Octarian society, while it was oppressive, was also predictable, and no one had to worry about things changing. That was until Octarians found the desire to live on the surface, and unfortunately not everyone was prepared for that. Smollusk actually starts to like them more and more each time they come to reconfigure a palette, and once all of them are done, Smollusk is friendly, and they can go and visit it whenever they want. So everything is back to normal, at least for now, and that is the end of Side Order. It's been confirmed that Splatoon 3 is the last game in the current Splatoon saga. Doesn't mean that it's the last Splatoon game ever, but it'll be the last game with these stories and these characters. It finished its update cycle in September of 2024, going out with a bang in the form of Grand Fest, the biggest final fest they've ever done. It was inspired by outdoor music festivals, including every idol from all of the games, with multiple stages and different performances across different days, with it being 3 days long in total. The teams were past, present, and future, with the Squid sisters, Off the Hook, and Deep Cut representing each team respectively. Team Past took home the win. I was on Team Future, which got 0 points, so I'm sure you can tell how I felt about that. Anyway, it was an amazing send-off to this saga, one that I really have no complaints about, and something that people still talk about to this day. Other than the announcement of the Switch 2, there's been no news on what's coming next for the world of Splatoon, so with that, we've made it to the end. My point for making this video was, 1, I wanted to yap about the lore of the series, and 2, because I wanted there to be a video that goes through the lore from the perspective of it being a story, because that's what it is. It's a beautiful, action-packed, surprisingly deep story with lessons that a lot of us can learn from, and quite frankly, are also very relevant in our world right now. And while Splatoon is very much loved by Nintendo and heavily promoted by them, I don't think the story is as much, which is why I'm saying it's underrated. Splatoon's dev team very clearly cares about the game, going out of their way to clarify many aspects of the story when they honestly didn't have to, but even more so are the fans who take time out of their lives to make the lore more well-known. It's why there are so many videos of people trying to get others to understand that there's more than meets the eye when it comes to this unassuming kids game made by Nintendo. Multiple sources I use in this video wouldn't have even been available to me had it not been for a handful of extremely generous people who translated the sources from Japanese to English. I touched on this a bit in my last video, but just because it's a kids game, that doesn't mean that there aren't things for older people to enjoy in it, and I hope that this video was able to introduce some people to what Splatoon has to offer. Also, the game is just good, so there's that. Thank you to the crazy talented translators that have translated many of the sources I used in this video. Thank you to the people who uploaded their gameplays so I can use it for footage. Thank you to the others that have made Splatoon lore videos, because I've watched so many of them and you've definitely inspired this one. Thank you to the Splatoon developers for caring about the game and providing so much more information about the world of Splatoon than they needed to. And of course, thank you all for watching. Bye!